Today, I'll tell you the story of a brave nurse who defied a general during the American Civil War. Sarah Blackwell risked everything to save the life of a wounded Confederate lieutenant, discovering secrets that would change the course of their lives. But the truth was more shocking than anyone imagined. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story from. The distant rumble of cannon fire had finally ceased as dusk settled over the Virginia countryside. Sarah Blackwell wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of blood across. Her once white apron was now a canvas of crimson and dirt, evidence of the 12 hours she'd spent tending to the wounded and dying on this blood-soaked field beside Richmond. "Water!" croaked a Union soldier beside her, his blue uniform torn and blackened. "Please, ma'am." Sarah nodded, reaching for her can. After helping him drink, she moved methodically to the next man, and the next. The Battle of Gaines's Mill had been particularly brutal, thousands of casualties on both sides. As one of the few female nurses allowed near the front lines, Sarah had earned respect through competence and sheer determination. "Miss Blackwell!" The voice came from behind her, urgent and commanding. She turned to see Dr. Freeman, the chief medical officer, his sleeves rolled up and surgical apron splattered with gore. "The general wants all medical personnel at the aid station immediately. They're bringing in another wave of wounded." Sarah glanced at the men still scattered across the field. "There are still men here who need—" "That's an order from General Harrington himself," Dr. Freeman cut her off, already turning to leave. "Burial details will handle the rest." Sarah watched him go, conflicted. In the fading light, the blue and gray uniforms of the dead and dying blended together until they were just men, sons, brothers, husbands. She had 10 minutes before she needed to report. 10 minutes to help as many as she could. She moved quickly from soldier to soldier, checking pulses, offering water, applying hasty tourniquets. The sun had nearly disappeared when she reached a cluster of bodies near the tree line. Most were clearly beyond help, limbs stiff. But as she turned to leave, a faint movement, almost imperceptible, from a young man in Confederate gray. Sarah knelt beside him. He couldn't have been more than 20, sandy hair and freckles across his nose that made him look even younger. A lieutenant, according to his insignia. Blood had soaked through his jacket from what appeared to be a bullet wound to the chest. Remarkably, she pressed her fingers to his neck. She felt a pulse, thread-like and erratic, but present. "Can you hear me?" she whispered, leaning close. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. A faint groan escaped his lips. "I'm going to help you," though she knew he probably couldn't hear. Working quickly, she tore open his uniform jacket to better assess the wound. The bullet had entered just below his collarbone, missing his heart, but likely puncturing a lung. Without proper medical attention, he would die before morning. In the distance, she heard the approach of the burial detail, soldiers assigned to identify and bury the dead. The Union dead would be recorded and given proper graves when possible. The Confederate dead were often buried in unmarked trenches. Sarah made a decision. She quickly rifled through the lieutenant's pockets, finding a letter and a small photograph of a young woman. She tucked these inside her own pocket, then began dragging him toward a nearby thicket of bushes. "What are you doing there, nurse?" The voice froze her in place. Sarah turned slowly to face General William Harrington himself, mounted on his chestnut stallion. A tall man with a full beard and hard eyes, he commanded respect and fear in equal measure. 2 aides flanked him, along with the soldiers of the burial detail. "Sir," she acknowledged, straightening as much as her exhaustion. "I found a survivor." The general's gaze fell to the Confederate officer. "A rebel lieutenant," he observed, barely alive from the look of him. "He needs immediate medical attention, sir," Sarah said. General Harrington surveyed the battlefield where hundreds of bodies still lay. "We haven't enough medical supplies for our own men, Miss Blackwell. You know that." "Every life," she began, "is subject to the realities of war," he finished for her. His voice wasn't cruel, merely matter-of-fact. "We've lost over 800 men today. 800 Union boys who won't go home to their mothers. This rebel chose his side." He turned to the burial detail. "Bury him where he fell," he ordered. "But, sir," Sarah protested, stepping forward, "the Geneva Convention states that wounded enemy combatants must receive the same care as—" "The Confederacy has not signed any such agreement," Harrington interrupted, his patience visibly thinning. "And while I respect your dedication, nurse, I remind you that you're under military authority." "My authority." Sarah felt the weight of the soldier's eyes upon her. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "With respect, General, I cannot in good conscience abandon a wounded man who might be saved." Something dangerous flashed in Harrington's eyes. "You refuse a direct order?" The consequences of such defiance were severe. She could be dismissed, even court-martialed. Yet Sarah couldn't bring herself. "I'm refusing to let a man die when I might save him." For a long moment, then General Harrington's face hardened. "Captain," he escort Miss Blackwell to the aid station immediately. Ensure she remains there until I determine how to address this insubordination." To the burial detail he repeated, "Bury him with the others." The captain mounted and approached Sarah. "Ma'am, please come with me." Sarah looked from the captain to the wounded lieutenant, then back to the general. In that moment she made a choice that would alter the course of many lives, including her own. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, and began walking with the captain toward the aid station. But her mind was already forming a plan. She would not let the young lieutenant die. Not if she could help it. Not even if it meant risking everything she had worked for. As they walked away, Sarah could feel General Harrington's eyes boring into her back. She knew she had made an enemy that day. What she didn't know was how deeply their paths would become intertwined in the bloody days to come, or that the wounded Confederate soldier would be the catalyst for a chain of events that would test the limits of duty, mercy, and the human heart in a nation torn apart by war. The aid station was a converted church, its pews removed to make way for rows of makeshift beds. Groans and cries filled the air as surgeons worked frantically to save those they could. The smell of blood, chloroform, and gangrene hung thick in the humid night air. Sarah moved mechanically between patients, changing bandages and administering what little morphine remained. Her mind, however, was elsewhere, on the Confederate lieutenant lying in the field, likely being lowered into an unmarked grave at that very moment. "Sarah," Dr. Freeman's face haggard with exhaustion, "General Harrington informed me of your disagreement." Stiffened. "I was following my conscience, Doctor." "Your conscience could get you sent back to Washington," he said quietly. "Or worse. Harrington is not a man who tolerates disobedience, especially from a woman." Sarah met his gaze evenly. "And you, Doctor? Would you have left that boy to die?" Freeman's eyes darted to ensure no one was listening. "What I would have done doesn't matter. The reality is that we're overwhelmed. Every bandage used on a Confederate is one less for our boys." He sighed heavily. "Report to the supply tent after your shift. We need to inventory what remains." Sarah nodded, an idea forming. The supply tent would be largely empty during the night shift. As midnight approached, the aid station quieted somewhat. Many had succumbed to their wounds, others had finally found relief in sleep or unconscious. Sarah checked to ensure the captain assigned to watch her was occupied with a messenger, then slipped out through a side door. The night was moonless, clouds obscuring the stars. A blessing. She moved silently toward the supply tent, pulse racing. Inside, she quickly gathered essentials: bandages, catgut for sutures, a small bottle of chloroform, and a surgeon's kit. She concealed these in a canvas bag beneath her apron. Next came the more dangerous. Sarah made her way toward the field where she had left the lieutenant. Burial details usually worked until darkness completely, then resumed at first with luck. The battlefield was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the days. Sarah used a small covered lantern to navigate between the bodies that still remained. Some had been buried. Others awaited mourning. She reached the spot where the lieutenant had lain, dread filling her as she saw the freshly disturbed earth. "No," she whispered, falling to her knees. She had been too late after all, but something caught her eye. A boot protruding from beneath a nearby tarpaulin. Heart pounding, Sarah pulled back the covering to reveal the Confederate lieutenant, still alive, barely. Beside him lay two other bodies, awaiting burial. "Thank God," she breathed. The burial detail must have been interrupted, perhaps called away for another duty, before they could complete their task. She checked his pulse, weaker than before, but present. "Lieutenant," she whispered, tapping his face gently. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered open briefly, revealing blue eyes clouded with pain and confusion. "I'm going to help you, but I need you to try to stay quiet." She worked quickly, cleaning the wound as best she could in the dim light. The bullet had indeed punctured his lung, explaining the frothy blood at his lips. After administering a small amount of chloroform, she extracted the bullet with steady hands. It was a procedure she'd watched Dr. Freeman perform countless times, though she herself was not technically qualified. "You've lost a lot of blood," she told the barely conscious man as she sutured the wound. "But you're young and strong. You might just survive this, Lieutenant." After bandaging his chest tightly, Sarah faced her next challenge, moving him. He was too heavy for her to carry alone, and too weak to walk. In the distance, she heard voices, another patrol, or the burial detail. Making a swift decision, Sarah dragged a fallen officer's greatcoat over the lieutenant's Confederate uniform, then wrapped her own shawl around his head, concealing his face. To anyone glancing their way, he might appear to be a Union soldier, with her helping. "I need you to try to stand for a little while." With tremendous effort, the lieutenant managed to get to his feet, leaning heavily against her. Sarah half carried, half dragged him toward the edge of the field, away from the approaching voices. Her destination was a small abandoned cabin she had noticed earlier beyond the Union perimeter. It had likely belonged to a farmer who fled the advancing. Every step was agony. Twice they had to stop and patrols passed nearby. The lieutenant's breathing grew increasingly labored, and Sarah feared he would die in her arms before they reached shelter. "Stay with me. I didn't defy a general just to have you die on me now." After what seemed like hours, they reached the cabin. It was little more than a shack, a single room, with a dirt floor and a damaged roof, but it would provide temporary shelter. Sarah laid the lieutenant on the floor, propping his head on her folded apron. "Water," he rasped, his first coherent word. Sarah held her canteen to his lips. "Small sips. What's your name, Lieutenant?" He swallowed painfully. "Thomas," he managed. "Thomas Elliott." "Lieutenant Elliott, I'm Sarah Blackwell. I'm a nurse with the Union Medical Corps, and I've just committed several court-martial offenses to save your life, so I'd appreciate if you'd cooperate by not dying." A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. "Yes, ma'am," before losing consciousness again. Sarah checked his bandages, already soaking through with blood. She would need to change them soon and find more supplies. And, somehow, she needed to return to the aid station before dawn, when her absence would surely be discovered. She sat back against the cabin wall, the weight of her action settling upon her. She had defied direct orders, stolen medical supplies, and rescued an enemy combatant. If discovered, she faced court-martial, imprisonment, perhaps even charges of treason. Yet, looking at the young man's face, peaceful now, Sarah couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. There would be consequences, and not just from military authority. General Harrington was not a man to forget. Outside, the distant sound of cannon fire resumed, heralding another day of bloodshed in a war that seemed without end. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of rest before the coming storm. Dawn broke with the distant thunder of artillery. Sarah jolted awake, momentarily disoriented, before remembering where she was and what she had done. Lieutenant Elliott still lay unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. The fever had started, his skin hot to the touch. Without proper medication, infection would claim him within days. Sarah checked his bandage, applied fresh water to fevered brow, reluctantly prepared to leave. She needed to return to the aid station before her absence was noted, and somehow continue her double life for as long as necessary. "I'll return tonight," she promised, covering him with the greatcoat. She placed her canteen within reach should he wake, then slipped out into the misty morning. Sarah had barely made it back to the perimeter of the Union camp when a hand clamped onto her arm. She turned to face Captain Miller, General Harrington. "Miss Blackwell," expression, "the general wishes to see you immediately." Her heart pounded. She kept her face neutral. "Of course, Captain." General Harrington's headquarters had been established in a commandeered plantation a quarter-mile from the main camp. As Sarah was escorted up the sweeping staircase, she mentally rehearsed her story. She had gone for a walk to clear her head after her shift. She had fallen asleep from exhaustion. Anything but the truth. The general stood at the window of what had once been a gentleman's study, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn when she entered. "Miss Blackwell," he was deceptively calm, "would you care to explain why you were seen leaving camp last night and again entering this morning?" Sarah steeled her. "I needed air, sir. After yesterday's events, I walked farther than intended and fell asleep beneath it. It was unprofessional, and I apologize." Now Harrington turned, fixing her with an appraising stare. "An interesting explanation, particularly as the burial detail reports that a certain Confederate officer's body has gone missing, the very same officer over whom you risked insubordination." "Sir, Enough, he cut her off. I do not tolerate lies any more than I tolerate disobedience. Where is he? Silent. The general's jaw. You realize the gravity of aiding the enemy is treason, punishable by hanging. Saving a wounded man is not treason. It's humanity. Humanity, he repeated, as if tasting something bitter. A luxury of those who haven't watched their men die by the thousands. He moved to his desk, lifting a sheet of paper. We found this in your quarters. Sarah's blood ran cold. She recognized the letter, Lieutenant Elliot. It makes for interesting reading, continued, particularly the part where Lieutenant Elliot describes his unit's next movements to his sister. He paused, watching her closely. Information that could save Union lives, Blackwell. Sarah had not read the letter, had only taken it to preserve the lieutenant's identity. Now she understood the general's particular interest. You want him alive, she realized, for the intelligence he might provide. A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed Harrington's. Indeed, so it seems our goals temporarily align, though for different reasons. You wish to save his life. I wish to extract information that might save hundreds of Union lives. He circled his desk, approaching her. So I'll make you an offer, Miss Blackwell. Bring the lieutenant to me, alive, and I'll overlook your insubordination. Continue this defiance, and I'll have no choice but to treat you as a traitor to the Union. Sarah weighed her options. Lieutenant Elliot would die without proper medical care she couldn't provide in an abandoned cabin. Yet delivering him to Harrington meant imprisonment, interrogation, and likely execution once his useful ended. I need time to consider. You have until tomorrow morning. For now, you're confined to the medical tent under guard. Dr. Freeman has been informed you're suffering from exhaustion. As Captain Miller escorted her out, Sarah's mind raced. There had to be another a way to save Thomas without betraying him. Back at the medical tent, Sarah worked mechanically, tending to the wounded while under the watchful eye of a Union private. Between patients, she unfolded Lieutenant Elliot's letter, reading quickly. My dearest Margaret, by the time you receive this, we will have engaged the Federal forces near Richmond. Colonel Ashton believes this offensive will turn the tide in our favor, though many of us privately doubt such optimism. Sarah skimmed through battlefield descriptions until a name caught her. I continue to search for any news of Robert in the Union forces. If he still serves with the 12th Massachusetts, as we last heard, we may soon face each other across the field. The thought of raising arms against our own brother haunts my dream. She read the passage twice more, a chill running down her spine. Robert L. The name was familiar, a Union captain who had died at her aid station just 3 weeks prior. She had held his hand as he spoke his final words, delirious with fever. Tell Thomas I forgive him. The letter continued. Mother's health deteriorates with each passing month. The blockade makes medicine scarce, and her consumption worsens. If not for Margaret Blackwell's kindness in sharing her own supplies, I fear Mother would have already left this world. Sarah's hands trembled. Margaret Blackwell, her own sister, who had married a Virginian before the war and remained in Richmond despite the conflict. The sister with whom Sarah had lost contact 2 years ago, when mail between North and South became restricted. The connections were dizzying. Lieutenant Thomas Elliot was not just any Confederate soldier. He was her brother-in-law's brother. His mother was being treated by her own sister. And his brother Robert, whose death Sarah had witnessed, had been fighting for the Union, a family divided by war, just like so many others. And now, through some twisted working of fate, their paths had converged on this blood-soaked field in Virginia. Sarah carefully refolded the letter, her decision made. She could neither abandon Thomas to die, nor deliver him to Harrington. There was only one path forward, one that would place her at even greater risk. Somehow she had to get Thomas Elliot across Union lines, back to Confederate territory, back to his family, and perhaps to her sister. As evening approached, Sarah gathered what supplies should conceal. When the guard changed at dusk, she would have her chance. General Harrington had given her until morning, but by then she intended to be long gone. Dusk settled over the camp as Sarah waited for her moment. The guard outside the medical tent stifled a yawn, clearly weary after a long day. When Dr. Freeman approached with a steaming cup, Sarah recognized opportunity. "Private Wilson," the doctor called. "A word, if you—" As the guard stepped away, Sarah slipped out the back of the tent. She had minutes at most before her absence. Moving swiftly through shadows, she collected the bundle of supplies she'd hidden in a wagon earlier that day. Civilian clothes, food, a map taken from an officer. The journey to the abandoned cabin seemed longer in the gathering darkness. Every rustle in the underbrush, every distant voice sent her heart racing. Twice she had to hide as patrols passed nearby. The second time, lying flat in a muddy ditch as soldiers passed close enough that she could have reached out and touched their boots. When she finally reached the cabin, she found Thomas awake, propped against the wall, his face gaunt with pain and fever. "You came back?" Barely. "I made a promise," Sarah replied. Kneeling beside, she pressed her hand to his forehead, still burning with fever, but his eyes were clearer than before. "Thomas, we need to move. Tonight." "Why?" he asked, wincing position. Sarah explained quickly about Harrington, the letter, and the connection she had discovered. Thomas's eyes widened when she mentioned Robert. "My brother, he's truly gone?" The grief in his voice made Sarah's "Yes, was with him at the end. He asked me to tell you he forgives you, though I didn't understand the meaning then." Thomas closed his eyes briefly. "We argued bitterly once the Union, said things brothers should never say." A tear slid down his hand. "My brother James's, she's your Sarah, a connection I never imagined possible." She pressed the civilian clothes into his hand. "Can you change? We need to look like farmers heading home, not a nurse and a soldier." With difficulty, Thomas managed to don the rough work shirt and trousers she had brought. Sarah changed into a simple dress, tucking her hair under a bonnet. She helped him to his feet, supporting much of his weight. "The Confederate lines are approximately 5 miles south," she explained, showing him the map. "We'll follow the creek to avoid the main roads and patrols." "You're coming with me?" Thomas asked, surprise evident in his voice. "You're deserting?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm choosing family over a cause that has cost too many lives already. My sister needs me. You'll never miss." They set out into the night, moving painfully slowly. Thomas could manage only a few hundred yards before needing to rest. The sound of cannon fire had ceased, but rifle shots still echoed occasionally in the distance, skirmishers and pickets engaging in the darkness. "Tell me about Margaret," Sarah said during one rest, partly to keep Thomas conscious, partly to fill the silence that felt too loud in the dangerous night. "She well? Happy?" A faint smile touched Thomas's lips. "Stubborn as the day is long. Refused to leave Richmond even when James begged her to go north to safety. She runs a small infirmary from their home now, treating whoever needs help, regardless of uniform color." "That sounds like hers." Memories of her headstrong sister flooding. They continued their slow journey through the night. Dawn approached. They reached a small stream that marked the approximate halfway point to Confederate territory. Sarah helped Thomas down the embankment to drink and rest. The crack of a rifle shattered the silence. Dirt kicked up inches from where they knelt. "Run!" Thomas, trying to push himself. Before they could move, horsemen emerged from the trees. Union cavalry on early morning patrol. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized Captain Miller at their head. "Miss Blackwell," he called, dismounting. "The general predicted you might attempt something foolish." His eyes moved to Thomas. "And Lieutenant Elliot, I presume?" Sarah stood, placing herself between Thomas and the soldier. "Captain, please, there's more to this situation than you know." "My orders are clear," Miller replied, though his expression held a hint of regret. "You're both to be returned to camp immediately." As the soldiers moved forward to seize them, hoofbeats thundered from the south. A Confederate patrol, drawn by the rifle shot, burst from the tree line. In seconds, chaos erupted as the two small forces engaged. Sarah pulled Thomas behind the shelter of a fallen tree as bullets flew overhead. Captain Miller fell, clutching his shoulder as his men retreated northward. The Confederate soldiers pressed their advantage, unaware of Sarah and Thomas's presence. "Now's our chance," Sarah whispered, while they're distracted. Supporting Thomas, she led him downstream, away from the skirmish. They had gone perhaps 50 yards when a voice called out, "Halt, or I'll shoot!" Sarah turned slowly. General Harrington himself stood on the bank above them, revolver aimed squarely at Thomas. "General," she acknowledged, her voice remarkably steady despite her terror. "I'm disappointed, Miss Blackwell." Harrington, "I believed you intelligent enough to recognize the better choice." "I made the only choice I could live with." Harrington's gaze hardened. "Step aside. The lieutenant comes with me." "No." Sarah remained firmly in front of Thomas. "You'll have to shoot me first." For a long moment, Harrington's expression remained impassive, revolver unwavering. Then, to Sarah's astonishment, a flicker of something like respect crossed his face. "You truly believe he's worth dying for? A rebel who has likely killed dozens of Union men?" "I believe every life has value," Sarah said, "even in war, especially in war." The general seemed about to respond when a bullet struck the tree beside him. The Confederate patrol had spotted them. Harrington ducked, returning fire. "Go!" he shouted to Sarah, surprising her further. "Get him out of here!" Sarah hesitated only a moment before helping Thomas down the embankment. Behind them, Harrington provided covering fire, allowing their escape. "Why?" she called back to him. "Because sometimes principles matter more than orders," he answered, firing again toward the Confederate patrol. "Now go, and tell no one of this moment. As far as history is concerned, Nurse Blackwell and Lieutenant Elliott vanished in the chaos of battle." Sarah nodded once, understanding the gift was giving them. With renewed determination, she supported Thomas as they made their way toward Confederate line, toward family, and toward whatever uncertain future awaited them in a country torn apart. Behind them, General William Harrington watched them disappear into the morning mist. He would report them both missing, presumed dead. A small mercy in a conflict that had shown too little of it. Perhaps, he reflected, holstering his revolver, the nurse had reminded him of something he had forgotten amidst the carnage, that compassion was not weakness, but the very thing worth fighting for.